is my family happy? Am I happy? Are we paying bills? And then is the work I'm doing really good?
Hey guys, welcome back to North. Sorry for the break there, took a bit of a summer vacation, but regardless, I'm happy to say that on today's episode, I'm speaking with designer Jay Ferracane. Jay runs a design studio called Angry Bovine, currently located in Boulder, Colorado. It's actually housed in an Airstream trailer turned mobile office. It's pretty awesome. I'm going to include links in the show notes if you want to see it for yourself. I definitely recommend checking it out. On this episode, we hear about Jay's approach to his work and how he chooses to problem solve by getting on a bike instead of sitting in front of the computer. We hear about caffeinated mornings, an event that Jay hosts, the usual highs and lows of being self-employed, how skating and music sort of helped shape his work ethic, and a whole bunch of other stuff too. If you want to find Jay on social media, check him out at Angry Bovine. Otherwise, sit back and pour yourself a drink and enjoy my talk with Jay Ferracane.
How is audio so far? Are we good in here?
I think so.
No outward bound sound?
We'll find out. First time I've ever recorded in a mobile office, Airstream turned mobile office. So, welcome.
Thank you.
What do you do?
I am a formally trained graphic designer, and I currently help companies build their brands.
Where did Angry Bovine come from?
People have asked me that question a couple times, and they always want it to be way more of an interesting answer, so I'm here to bum you out a little bit. In the 90s, everyone was trying to make their buck in one of the first .com booms, and I was working at an agency and was working for this guy, and we'd done this whole, basically created a brand for the agency around this idea of we were going to go out and start mining all these sites for all the content they were creating, and then we're going to bring it back. And so I had this concept that we were like bovines of media. We'd go out and like graze and stuff like that and bring it back. It was also the first studio that I had ever worked at where we didn't have secretaries. They had executive admins. We were working on a used car account, actually same agency, and we couldn't call it used cars. It was previously owned automobiles. And I'm like, man, everyone's becoming such a pussy about what things really are called. And I'm like, and then we had a break room, and on CNN one day I go in there at lunch, and on the news there was an outbreak of mad cow in the UK. And I'm like, what's going to happen if you can't go to a cocktail party and talk about mad cow disease because you're going to offend somebody? And I'm like, they're going to start shifting like horrible names of diseases to like more appropriate sounding things. Like, I was like, yeah, mad cow is going to become like angry bovine disease. And I'm like, holy crap, that's a good, because up until that point I had built all my portfolios and like my work was always housed under my name, which the era I come from in graphic design, it wasn't about you. Yeah. I think it's a very contemporary thing to do today. Chipkalback.com, you know, that's how people find you. And so I was like, oh, that gives me a way to organize my work under something that's not about me. Yeah. And so Angry Bovine just became this moniker that stuck. And then at the same time, I had seen a special about inmates being stuck in pink rooms. And so I took the magenta and just thought it would be kind of a funny way. Would like that make a cow angrier if it saw it, you know, like a bold charge of red flag. So anyway, a lot of non sequiturs in there. And that's, I do have this like subversive love in the work I create sometimes, that like whether I'm jamming in a reference to a punk rock album cover that I really loved as a kid, or if it's just making the woman at the front desk when I show up for a meeting to have her get on the phone and go, Jay from Angry Bovine is here. So yeah, it's kind of it's a non sequitur, and the longest run of things, it was something for me to build a place to archive my work that wasn't about me. It was just about the work. It was a platter to put stuff on. So yeah. So if you can, you touched on, I think you're at an agency in maybe another lifetime, but if you can give us your life story in 2 minutes or less, what's that look like? I think I know you're like a military kid. Yep. So born and raised, I was born in North Carolina. I like to say I grew up in Hawaii, so my dad moved us there when I was 9. And man, you learn a lot about respect in a place like that because you just don't talk trash. And I surfed a lot and skated a lot, and there's a lot of etiquette. Hawaii or a military family or both? Both. I would say both. Actually, all of the above. You're right. Yeah, because you do learn, you know, your old man is going to let you know when you're not doing stuff right. And I'm very thankful for the upbringing I had. You know, it made me a really flexible human too, I think, because or adaptable at least, because we moved every 3 years. The longest I ever lived in one place was Hawaii. So that's why I consider it kind of the most formative part of my life. So I lived there for 9 years.
What age were you at that time?
I moved there, and I'm going to tell you're going to figure out how old I am. I'm really old. I know I look like $100.
You don't have to drop years. You can just give us like the age range.
I moved there when I was 9,
okay,
actually, and I moved out when I was 16. So my dad stitched 3 tours there together, and we got a pretty good look at the island, and and then I moved to Japan. So I like to say I was born in North Carolina, raised in Hawaii, and graduated from high school in Japan. And then I went to school in California. So
that's insane.
And then I don't know if I was ever not really good at anything, but I knew I didn't fit in super well with, I'm not going to go be a tax accountant or something like that. Yeah. And my mom was a really fantastic artist, and and my old man can write, and there was always creativity in our house, even though it was pretty structured and, not what you would probably think of a military family. Then I found my way into skateboarding, and it had so much visceral material around it. It made you almost kind of want to make it yourself. Mm-hmm. And so like being a huge fan of skateboarding and Thrasher magazines back in the day and stuff like that, that really kind of like made me want to go just make visual stuff. And so I thought I'd be an artist at some point. And so I went to school originally for art, realized I didn't want to stay in school because I hated school. And most artists stay in school for a really long time, go to grad programs, that kind of thing.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at San Jose State University, but I also did a tour of like every community college in the greater Bay Area. And then, but when I was in school at San Jose, I remember the art people were just, art teachers were constantly telling me like, don't put messages in your paintings. You want your user, your viewer to figure it out and blah, blah, blah. And so then I had to go take a course in like typography, and I didn't even know that was a thing because I was already doing boards for friends that were pro skateboarders. And I'm like, oh, there's a whole profession called graphic design. And I thought that was too big of a shift. So I went into illustration, and then I realized like, oh, you sat in a room as an illustrator and you waited for a guy called a creative director to tell you to draw something. And I'm like, well, that's stupid too. And I'm like, I need to be that guy. And so then went to design school, and, but I was already doing design at that time. It was kind of a funny thing. So, cause I would, I had friends that I worked with that were starting businesses, and they're like, hey, you're an artist. Can you make my business card? And then, and those were the goofy days. It was hilarious. I remember drawing this guy's business card. I drew it at like 4 times the scale, and then we photostatted it and shrunk it down into like, it was ridiculous. It was so like, I don't know, it was meta actually when you really think about it. So, but I came from that world. And then once I finally got done with design school, I was one of the only students that actually worked the whole time in our program.
While you're in school.
Yeah. It was kind of a really good learning lesson because I left a design school in a really crowded market, and I was the only one that didn't have only student hitting the streets, as it were, without a compulsory portfolio like all the other students hitting the streets. So I actually had real world work.
All right.
And I just learned better that way too. I would leave design school, I'd go work a design job, and then I'd go wait tables at night. And so I never really had any downtime, and I actually still kind of work like that today. But it was a funny world because I got let out into the Bay Area and its first .com boom, and it really needed visual designers. And so you got a killer salary right out of school.
Yeah.
And then, you worked on some really goofy stuff that never saw the light of day, and the agency might not have gotten paid for it. So it was a weird world to work in.
And that was late 90s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That must have been, that probably sets you up for a really solid work ethic because you're coming with the military background, but yet you have the DIY creative side of skateboarding, where it's like this very, it's kind of a juxtaposition, I guess, on the surface, but it sets you up pretty well for.
Yeah. And I think, and I think, I like to joke, but it's kind of, I think inward looking is pretty truthful. I think I make up for talent with try. Coming out of the military, nothing really comes easy, and you earn it. And I think now I teach design, which is really weird because as a guy who totally hated school as a kid, I've worked on like really huge education brands, and now I teach. And I think somebody was like, remember all that shit you put your teachers through? We're going to make people do it to you now, which I haven't had. But the interesting thing is I think I try and teach design from a very trade driven perspective. You wake up some mornings and you're not inspired, and you've got to go make stuff that helps people communicate their brands or solves a problem. I joke, I taught undergrad for 1 year, and that's probably a whole podcast to itself. But the funny thing about that was when I got in, I think I bummed out like a good 50% of my introduction to like creative concept classes, because I'm like, you don't go into design or advertising because you have to.
Yeah.
You do it because you want to.
Yeah.
And it's way more like being a carpenter than it is an artist, because at some point you're going to show up, you've gone through a breakup, you're miserable, and whatever thing is going on in your life, somebody died, all that stuff's going on, and you still got to make.
Turn out unicorns.
Yeah, totally. And you got to push it too.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, I don't know, I kind of looked at it. I try and bring that reality to a lot of people that, hey, this is a trade.
Yeah.
And I really pursue it as such. Like, it's a practice.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this, like design calisthenics, which I joke about, but there is a reality to priming myself for the day and getting my work done.
Yeah, that was the catalyst, I think, to this whole us talking about doing this podcast in the first place. Was I think I reached out to you actually when I did the interview with Mike Giant, and I asked you if you had any solid questions for Mike, and you came up with a great one, which was, does he consider himself a tradesman or a craftsman?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's always something that's sort of, I think, in the back of any creative's mind. Where do you see yourself sitting as far as 50-50? Depends on the gig.
I think maybe it is the gig. I think I asked that question because I was hoping Mike was going to tell you, because he has such a diverse background. I mean, like, he's a true maker's maker. Like, he can tattoo, he can paint, he does graphics. I mean, the thing that comes out of his hand looks like an inkjet printer, you know? And so I was hoping he was going to say he provide, because maybe I'd be like, oh, I found, someone who was approaching work in the same way as me.
Yeah.
But I really do think I'm probably 75% tradesperson. Like, I think very systematically, and I've worked with a lot of startups too. And I don't know if it's a defense mechanism, but I've worked with so many brands that need slight shifts or pivots that if you really bolt them into these one hardened, big artistic ideas, it can be really limiting. So I've tried to kind of create a design aesthetic and process with my clients that's uber modular. And it freaks people out sometimes when they say, well, could we change this? And I don't want anyone to get the idea that I'm not like there's two terrible phrases when they call this kind of design, but it's either Frankensteining or Chinese food. Like, I want a little of that, and a little of that. But there is accommodation. And I think that design really is, and it's an exercise in compromise. There are places where you're like, you have to take a really hard line and be like, nope, this is the way it has to be. But it's a job. And I think that's the one thing that a lot of people figure out is like, how do you get to the end of the job? How do you get paid?
Yeah.
And I want to be able to put it in my book, but there's a lot of work I do that doesn't show up because it's collateral work, or I'm doing someone's PowerPoint layout or something like that. So there's a lot of variables that go into it. But I think most of my entry point into work is I have a system or an approach to this, and moments of inspiration have to come at some point, because you're like, dude, that's the way to say it succinctly, or that's the mark that'll really communicate all these ideas. And it gets, I work on a lot of brands that aren't tangible, which is weird. A lot of software, right? And a lot of people meet me and they go, oh, do you work in the record industry or the skate industry? And I do stuff for bikes quite a bit, but I would say the bulk of my work, the reason my kids, have clothes on their body is not because of that work. It's mainly because I do a lot of stuff for enterprise software. And so, not sexy, but it doesn't mean you can't do good work there. And I think the thing that excites me too, and this maybe is more that tradesperson view, I get excited about learning. I don't know, I used to have this real, I would be nervous when I'd walk into a job like, oh, how am I going to do this? I don't know anything about this space. I don't know, blah, blah. And I realized at some point that there's a really cool thing that we get to do as creators when we walk into a new client, or even helping a client go into a new space that you've been worked with for a while, is you get to learn that new space. And in that process, that probably is why we have a little bit of a privilege as communicators, because our job is to go, well, I had to learn about your world that you work in every single day, because I need to help you communicate it to people that might not know who you are. Yeah. And so you become this really interesting mediary. And so
it's almost a blessing when someone's not knowing.
It really is. And I would say that, not that I'm not fearful whenever I walk into a project anymore, but now I'm a lot more trustworthy in the process of, I don't know anything about this right now, but I'll understand it eventually, or at least be able to help communicate it. So yeah, I think it's much more trade driven than art though, for sure.
What was your first job? Do you remember? And do you
in design or in
first job? I mean, it could have been like raking leaves or anything.
First real job was with a friend of mine, Dallas Dunn. If you're out there, give me a shout. But it was in Hawaii. His father ran the restoration of the USS Bowfin, and it was a World War II submarine that got sunk, and it's now on display in Arizona or near the Arizona Memorial in Hawaii. we renovated it. It was one of the first jobs that we ever did. And we actually ran parties for like, retirees and stuff like that. So it was goofy that you had two like 13-year-old kids that were like, we were around like grinders and we ran barbecues, and it was literally like they gave us a lot of responsibility and for not knowing shit. And it was pretty awesome. It was a pretty cool thing. And I loved the military too. So like I got to shoot the shit with old timers, and then I got to work on military history too. So
Is there anything from that very first job that you still can tap back to today, whether it was work ethic or if it was just trying to enjoy what you do, even if it's not enjoyable?
Yeah. No, actually it's really funny. So I remember so that time, and this is a long time ago. This is like, God, this is early 80s. Okay. And Hawaii had a really cool punk rock scene. And so weirdly enough, and I remember being like 13 and skate crews coming through there, and I remember Agent Orange came to town, and we were just like, what is going on? This is amazing. But there was a punk kid that worked there. He was like one of our managers, and I remember he gave me and Dallas like the worst haircuts ever. He's like, because he had this cool shaved head, and we're like, we want that. And he goes, well, your first haircut you can't do with clippers. So he shaved our heads with scissors. And but what I learned from that was that guy, no matter what crap job he had in front of him, he never lost his sense of humor. Yeah. And I always kind of took that away, that there was some cajoling in the fact that like he's like, it's miserable as shit right now, because we'd be like in, and I gotta believe that was all asbestos and stuff that we were taking out in this submarine, and we'd be in there just like grinding stuff out, and I don't even know if we were getting paid now that I think about it, but that guy always had a funny story for us, and he could like surf, he could skate, and so like he had these other world interests, but then he was also like a pretty damn good handyman. Like if something had to be fixed, he'd figure it out. And I'm like, that's really cool. Yeah. So probably that was a big takeaway. I can't even remember that guy's name though.
So how did you know when it was time to sort of, you mentioned that you're working with a different agency, so did you branch out on your own right after that, or how did you know when it was time to sort of start
on my own? Came a lot longer. So I had a funny lead up to it. I worked both client side and agency side. So I started in agencies, worked in agencies for a while, went through the first and second .com boom in agencies. And then my last stint was at a big ad agency where they had become like, they were part of, it was a million mergers that came together. I was kind of disenchanted with the design world at that point, and I had enough friends in tech and stuff like that I remember this one guy, and I think it's what every designer wants, is someone says, hey, come in, we want you to put your vision on everything. And this guy had offered this job to me to go work at a software company. Now, this isn't like an Apple, like, holy crap, super sexy software company. This was, did you ever use a PC?
I mean, not by choice.
Okay, but so when you start a PC, there's that blue screen. Yeah. And that's a little chunk of software called BIOS. Okay. And that little chunk of software basically powers everything in the world that runs on what's called x86. So it's everything that's like an IBM clone. That's everything from cash registers to ATMs to gas pumps. They really all have this like little simple computer inside them. And so I was brought in at a time to help them basically turn a commodity item into a premium brand. And so they knew so much about what you could do with this little primal kind of operating system that they brought in me, and they literally did. They let me change everything from like the lobby. So at first when the guy said it, I'm like, yeah, my agency, we just come over and we'll do it through the agency. And then when I really started to think about it, I'm like, wait, they want me to come in and do everything. Yeah. And I wasn't even 30 yet. And I'm like, here we go. And so I got in there and I learned a lot about building creative teams, managing creative teams.
This was your first gig on your own?
First gig leading up to it. It was kind of what paved the path. Okay. So leaving agency, going client side. And I did two different big brands in client side in the Bay Area. And then went back to work for an agency. And the cool thing was I took those experiences working in-house with the people that I would usually be working with. And because a lot of times I think designers come out of design school going, I'm just going to make cool shit. Right. And the real thing is especially in like anyone who's selling something, there's somebody whose ass is on the line. And if it's not communicated clearly or correctly or whatever, those guys don't sell those things and those people lose their jobs. Yep. And so it was my first real up close experience with that. So I went back to an agency after that, and that was my last stint before I did my own thing. And I found myself coming out of a place where I controlled everything, going in and having to defend a lot of my decisions or ideas with internally. Clients were loving it, but internally we were run by like a very engineering heavy management team. Mm-hmm. And they didn't get a lot of times when we were like, well, we don't know how long that's going to take. Just typical creative shit that drives linear people crazy, right? And so, and it always drove one of my bosses crazy that he couldn't put our time in like a spreadsheet. And I actually learned a lot about running my own business from that guy, because I do realize now in hindsight, like, oh, that's why we were pushed on schedules, is because he kept everybody paid because we were pulling in. And so it made a lot of sense. It just didn't perfectly fit in with the way I wanted to do creative. And so at a certain point in my life, I decided I wanted to see my kids. I have 2 kids, and I just love being around my family. And this, at least where I was in my career, I felt like I was not home a lot, and I wanted more of that. So my wife and I started what was called the Grass is Greener Tour. One of the places we looked was here, Boulder, Colorado. You know, the economy was doing pretty good at that point. I walked in, I said to my bosses, I think we're moving. And I was a player manager. So like, even though I was running creative teams within the agency, I was still designing quite a bit. And that was my way to get the teams to do the things I needed them to, because they didn't want to get outdone by the old man. And so I remember, like, as the economy started to decline, I basically flew back and forth to California because I kept my job here in Colorado. And it was an interesting thing because I was still valuable. I was still doing work that I liked. But as the economy started to really fall apart, so this is, 8 years ago, people that I had worked with in the past were coming to me and saying, hey, can you help us do this thing? And because I was in my little independent studio here for the majority of a month, every month, I remember I started taking on that work, and I was getting less work at our place just because we weren't busy. And it was I think it was the safest way ever to start your own business. Yeah. But I did have a really clear line at some point going like, that you do reach a point in your career, especially in a creative career, that you can't work for other people. Yeah. There's no way you can really do the work you should be doing, because unless you do the work the way that you do your work, you'll never be at your full potential. Yeah. And so I started Bovine 8 years ago in that scenario, coming out of working for a bunch of other people. And then literally, like I said, the work kind of started to build up around me. And, one of the first projects out of the gate we did was Strava. And so it was kind of like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah, that's sick. That's
so
pretty
it was
solid first one.
So it was fun. No pressure after that, but it was a proof point for me personally. And I think that's the other thing. You meet a lot of creative people, and everyone at the outset goes, oh my God, those are like really confident people that never fail. I'm like, no, dude, like, we're not super confident. I think it's one reason we work super hard is like, well, maybe it's not confident. I think I have confidence, but there's some, God, what do you call it? There's a little bit of self-doubt sometimes. It's like, hey, will this be as good as the last one? But that's a fuel too, I think, sure. So yeah. So a long way around to getting to my own, but I had to go do some work for some other folks until I figured out like, yeah, I'm time to do this on my own. And I think it's like, why don't you have roommates anymore? Right. At some point in your life, you just get tired of shit. It's like, I don't want to tell you how to put the dishes away, So, yeah.
How much of it have you found is belief versus luck versus hustle? This is a question I ask most people, and everyone has a different answer, but I think luck is probably the lowest on the scale, because as we know, a lot of things don't happen just
I would agree.
It takes a lot of work to.
I love Rob Dyrdek used to have this shirt that he wore all the time that said "Make your own luck," and I think that's the truth. Yeah. So it really boils down to hustle. Yeah. I talk to a lot of people about business development and stuff like that, and I've been really fortunate because I think because of my straddling the world in both agencies and client side, I built some relationships where I really do try and demystify what it is I'm doing. It's not rocket science. I don't think everybody can do it. Sure. But it's also like really good designers can always explain why they've done what they've done. And so I kind of have really tried to make that a practice of when a client goes like, why is it like this? Why are you doing those things? If I can't explain it, I shouldn't be doing it. Yeah. And that's been one of my successes in the building. So I would say hustle is definitely up there. Luck plays into it. Luck actually makes things dangerous though. Yeah. Because I think luck can stack up work every once in a while. Like, I sent out 50 proposals and you're used to going like, hey, 5 of those hit, 3 of those hit. Yeah. And then luck strikes and you get all of them. You're like, now I got to go staff up. Yeah. And I've found that too. Like, I'm in some projects right now where I've got a designer and a developer on a bunch of stuff for me, and you go back and you look and you're like, I'm not making any extra money and I'm managing people. Yeah. So there's also a sweet spot too in starting to manage that. So what were the 3 things you had?
Belief, luck, or hustle.
Oh yeah. And the belief is I do think you have to maintain belief, because if you ever give up hope, either you're sunk. And like, I know that kind of can get a little bit, I don't want to get all like,
woo-woo.
Yeah, woo-woo. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I don't want to get woo-woo, but there is some, there is some truth to the fact that if you pull your energy down and you're like, I'm not doing it anymore or whatever. I've seen it. I've seen it in my own thing. And I have to almost go back to these compulsory things that I do to get work going again. Because everyone has. If you run your own place, you will have these slowdowns and startups. And I've really started to realize like, oh, it's slow now. I know it's going to come back. So the belief is still there, right?
Yeah.
But there are practices I start to put into effect that get the work to come back up again. And in those downtimes, I do things like go pick up my kids more often, and I work on my portfolio, or I'll go do dumb projects like make shirts and hats for my friends.
Yeah. What's that? What do those downtimes look like? Because I know certainly we all have them. For me, that's when I start to pursue personal projects that I've been thinking about, and just try not to focus on the lack of work that might not be coming in at that time, but focus on what can I do to get this thing going again. What do you mentioned picking up your kids? I know you're an avid cyclist.
Yep. So I'll ride more.
Okay.
I live on a ranch, so there's plenty of stuff here to do. And I do think creatives need that. And the one thing you can't do is panic. I remember the first year I ran Bovine, and we started to get a slow period, and I literally sat catatonic at the computer, like waiting for emails to come in.
Oh, yeah.
And then
refresh.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, this isn't doing any good. And in that belief world, it was funny. I was just reading some interview with somebody about self-help or something like that. And, I know a lot of people who have benefited from going out and talking to people about what they have going on in their life. But for me, it's really like asking myself questions, going like, why isn't this working right now? What can you do? And so like, it's a little bit schizophrenic in the way that I feel like I do it. But a lot of times I feel like I have my best fixing tools for what's going on are within me. Mm-hmm. So that belief thing and like, hey, I got it. At some point it's going to come around, and you really do have to hold on to that, because I've met guys that will get ready to like shutter their stuff, like close a business. And then they found out like, dang, I got to go they'll send me some work, because they're like, hey, I already took a full-time gig, and these people came back and they really need some help. You think you can help them out? So it's a kind of a funny world, but yeah, you got to maintain, you got to keep believing.
PMA.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. HR. Do it.
Can I pour you? Well,
yeah, I'm going to try this. I'm sticking with your Canadian action.
Go for it.
You can keep drinking my rosé of whiskeys.
I like it a lot. I'm going to go for Collingwood on this next
pour.
Yeah, this next pour.
And you know how we do it in jelly jars around here too, right? That keeps it pretty real.
I was just going to bring plastic cups. A jelly jar is like a step up.
Little solo action.
Some red solos.
I've seen people do there's these like nice porcelain solo cups now. It's pretty fancy.
Fancy. So do you have any routines that make you, I guess, better at what you do? And that can go something like you get up and you meditate, you eat a certain breakfast, you get out and you go for a ride first. What does your sort of day-to-day when you're at your best look like?
Yeah. Day-to-day is, and I think that this is a funny thing. One of my old co-creative director at the agency I left to start my own deal, Christian Seacrest, his father, Ron Seacrest, founded Miami Ad School. And I remember him telling me, and I've ridden bikes and stuff like that for so long. And even throughout my college career, even I was racing bikes. So, when you run out of time, the only time you can do is get up earlier. And so for the good last 2/3 of my life, I've woken up at like 6:30, maybe even earlier, 5:30 a lot of times when I was doing group rides and stuff like that. And I would ride. My best days happen if there's a outdoor physical activity, some sort of no computer, body moving through space kind of thing. Eating, yeah, no. I've trying to train myself to just like eat whatever's there first thing off the bat in the morning, and it's a super important thing. I remember talking to my old man about like, hey Dad, you should wake up and rather than have 50 cups of coffee, maybe you put a little food in your body and you go for it. But he's got his own deal too. So, but I do think it really helps me get to go have energy to ride. I got to wake up, I do my eat, but I ride almost every day, and I always joke it's frequency over anything else, because I'm not really riding to keep my body fit. Mm-hmm. I have like a whatever. I have just like a fairly. I'm thankful I have a core level of like about fitness, and then but it's more for my brain, and because like I think I solve so many things. Like today I was riding and it came to me to figure out like, oh, I know how to write that brand promise now. And then I also realized on that ride too, I'm like, I got to write a syllabus tonight. That's the other thing is like the big shocker to most people when you're doing design is that there's a lot of like problem solving doesn't really happen at your computer ever. That's like manifestation. That's where you kind of go and like author the things that you've solved for. Yeah. And so I think my day starting away from my computer is the best way for me to be good at what I'm doing. I work really well at night. So, and that's getting to be a challenge as my kids get older because like they're like up at like 10:30 and 11 o'clock and I don't go back out into the studio until 11, but I can literally work on something. And as long as when I shut it down or save it, I feel like I've solved something, I can go to bed at 2 o'clock at night, get up at 6 and I'm fine. Yeah, sure. And I just feel like, oh my God, I got it. And things are moving. But that's when there's no emails and I'm super ADD, you know that. Like I usually have music going. I'm like an email comes in, I got to answer the email and blah, blah. And so like at night, it all kind of calms down. Yeah. And so there's still music on out here, but there's like, it's more work around the work. Yeah. And I'm not managing a bunch of stuff because I still do run a business, even though I'm the designer here. I'm running a business too. So that's taking new projects that are coming in from existing clients, referrals, following up on stuff, and so there's a lot of that day to day. And then like right now, I said, we're so at capacity that I've got other folks working for me. So there's now I've halved my design time and the self-help tools I was talking about earlier. I mean, I read a lot and I know that people are like, oh dude, I thought you were a Cro-Magnon. I didn't even know you could read.
Are you reading anything good right now? Or is
I read like stuff on the internet, cool. I do like articles. I'm an article guy. Like I don't know what I've got Draplin's book on my desk and cool. I leaf through it all the time and stuff. Yeah. But I couldn't tell you what the last book I read was. But okay. I was reading this article about one of the designers from Pentagram, who's a pretty senior guy. And he was talking about like, he really only gets to design like maybe a couple hours one day a week. And the rest is meetings and all this stuff. And so he said what he's gotten really good at is like while he's walking around from place to place, he's processing. And that's why I've always joked that designers are the least paid hourly employee by far because we'll be at dinner with your wife and you're like, you haven't gone out on a date night forever. And she'll ask you some question and you'll snap up and you're like, you're not listening to me, right? And you're like, nope, but this whole menu is sent in Museo Sans. And it's just like sometimes you got to kind of like, you got to step away from it, but you are processing a lot. And I think that reading that interview at a guy at his level, and I look at myself as, for whatever anybody sees me as, I just think I show up to work every day to work because I don't know, I haven't made it. Yeah. And so I read someone who I really respect and he's in this thing where he gets a very little amount of time to do work and he's doing great work. And I'm like, that's a really cool thing. And I work all the time and I do mediocre work. And so like, I'm like, maybe I can move it in the middle a little bit, but I try and put those practices in place. Like we went on this big long trip into Montana and I know while I was there, I'd literally like look at my sketchbook and then I would close my sketchbook and I would go, okay, I'm going to dedicate the next 5 minutes while my kids are watching Netflix and the wife's on a phone call. I'm going to think about what are solutions for this thing? And we're working on a bunch of stuff right now. A couple brand launches, cool. Web stuff, it's the normal gamut in here. Yeah. And so, so I think that's one way I've tried to help kind of move that around a little bit. So
touching back to what you were saying about getting out there and riding first. So I have to credit you with being kind of the guy that, or I'd say one of the guys that, I think prior to meeting you, I had a different view on cycling, road bikes. I grew up on a mountain bike, so it was very easy to make fun of people who ride road bikes, but now I'm one of those people. And I have definitely found that riding a road bike, especially early in the morning, it's a different output in the afternoon, but getting out there early in the morning, my brain is basically, it's just like the night sky, all these ideas all over the place. Yeah. And then after a ride, everything has become more linear and sorts itself out. I was just talking about this with a buddy of mine who's a writer, Matt Hart. Shout out to Matt. And he and I were talking about all this, how he's a runner. I hate running. I love riding a bike, but it's the same result is that we both find that after a good ride or whatever, even if it's just a quick hour, all the priorities sort of come to the surface and things sort of line themselves up naturally, which is incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, there's a biomechanical reason for that too, because I think when we were, these little monkey humanoids running around trying to avoid getting stepped on by, mammoths and shit, our brains were like really high functioning when because we were trying to find food, but we were also but we were moving.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a weird thing that we sit stationary. Like I tell kids now, like a lot of my design students, I'm like, hey, I want to see some sketches because I'm making wrist gestures that you can't see in the pod world, but we've been doing that since last cave walls, right? Sure. We've only been doing this finger typing for like maybe 100 years, 120 years, right? Yeah. Typewriter. Yeah. And so our synapses aren't wired to put thoughts through our fingertips. I bet you there's some people that are really adapting quickly. I'm not that way. Yeah. But I think getting your body into movement and starting to go, it sorts things out. Michael Cody used to always say riding fixes everything. Yeah. And so I think, and I too was like, I remember that I came out like skateboarding and stuff and a culture of the sports were like you'd sold out if you played sports, and cycling definitely fit into it because it has like a uniform, tight pants and stuff. And I read this book. I was reading a book, and that was a book called Bob Key by this guy named Bob Roll. And I remember reading, I was reading it because my girlfriend then at the time, now it was my wife, she had this book, and I was like, oh, this guy's pretty cool. He's kind of this like, I don't know, outlandish dude for cycling at least, right? Yep. And I remember him reading, he was on tour with the 7-Eleven team when it was like the first American team to go to the Tour de France. And they dragged around a milk crate full of punk rock albums and they drank whiskey. And I'm like, well, maybe I can be into this sport.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I met some of that level guys, and it wasn't, the stereotypical people. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, I think I could be a part of this, as something I've done for, God, like 25 years now. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy.
You had a friend too, if I remember. I think when we were first talking about this, didn't you have a friend or a boss or someone who sort of brought you a bike or basically was like, hey, check out like road bikes? I feel like I remember you saying...
The first guy who gave me my first creative direction job, this might be the story. Okay. Gave me one of the first production aluminum bikes, but it was a cross bike, and he was from England, and the brakes were backwards. Okay. And so that bike was in our studio. Is this the thing?
I think so. This sounds familiar.
And so like the designers every once in a while would come in, and I'd be on the phone. They're like, "Can I take the bike? Can I take the bike to go get coffee?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go." I'd like wave them off, and then they'd come in with like coffee on their shirt and a bleeding elbow, and then they didn't know. But yeah, that guy actually really was like. Tim Eads, if you're listening too, was really instrumental in, we were riding pretty hard back then, like racing and stuff like that, road racing. But he was one of the first guys to be that dude that was like, I know you from this world and I see how hard you work there. I want to give you an opportunity to go do what you want to do in a professional setting at the same and that was funny. That first creative direction job, we had a bunch of cyclists that worked there. And it was almost self-destructive. It was so competitive because like everyone was trying to outdo everybody. It was like
casually outpace each other.
Yeah, it was man off, dude. It was insane. And so so there is something to really movement. And I've told that to design students coming back to the Miami Ad School thing. I remember Christian going like, "Yeah, my dad makes everybody play soccer every morning." I'm like, I thought for the longest time like, well, his dad just must love soccer. And then at one point he's like, "No, dude, it's to get bodies in movement and get you to step away from, your really conscious thinking and let your subconscious do some work, because all of a sudden you're like, I got to kick this ball and I'm running, that guy's going to run into me. And now how am I going to write that headline or what's that layout going to look like is now moved back, and it'll start to sort itself out. And that's what's great about cycling is it does do that thing. Yeah. I don't do it as much in skating. Running, it'll happen every once in a while, but I'm like you, I ran cross country for years and I hate running too. Yeah. And that actually was a funny world too. I was just telling somebody this story the other night, but I remember I was running track and PE, and we had to run like around our campus. This was on part of my community college tour, and I was like in vans and cutoffs, and we ran up on the ROTC group, so they started trying to outpace us. So I ended up trying to like just put everybody in the grave, and I did, and I ran back to my car and puked like 2 times. Those guys came and they were like, "Hey, do you want to, I almost joined the Marines after that, because like they were like, come out on runs, and I was so uber competitive and like chip on my shoulder little guy that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go kick these dudes. And I've pursued work the same way though, like I think all those things
are connected.
They're all so connected. So
Steve Jobs used to do like walk meetings where basically any important meetings he needed to take care of, it was always a walk.
Should
I
be.
guess those were
in movement.
Yeah, I guess those were, either really good or really terrible, but either way.
You can be getting yelled at by Steve while walking around. Hey, this is a beautiful campus. You suck. Yeah.
So do you have a harder time getting projects up off the ground, or do you have a harder time knowing when they're totally done and they're wrapped and they're ready to deliver? I like personal projects. I have a bad tendency of waiting until I think everything's in place before I want to get it going, which is crazy because nothing's ever in place. You just have to sort of get going at some point. So which is harder for you, and sort of how do you mitigate it?
I think starting a project, and this was, again, this is part of my art school upbringing. I remember I had an art teacher. He taught me two really good things: start and don't erase. And I thought that was really cool. So you'd be sitting there, and we had these goofy things called donkeys, right? And it was like a bench and your masonite easel thing stuck in one end. I'd be sitting there trying to think, what am I going to draw today? And he would come up and grab my arm and just go and like put a mark on there. And he goes, make a mark. Yeah. And so I've always kept that in my head, make a mark. When I start a project, especially the way that even I bid projects, and this is where it gets a little bit business separating from the craft world, because I've been doing it long enough, I have things I can go open and rename and start technically. And sometimes that's all it takes is like, it'll be on, and I run a very analog list of things to do. I love to check things off at the end of the day. It's how I time track against that. I'm like, holy crap, I have that logo review in 2 weeks from now and I haven't even started anything. Well, you better get started. And so I'll tell myself something mentally like, okay, tonight at a bare minimum, before you go to bed, you name a document, logo studies. Okay. And then all of a sudden that just spills. So you've made that mark, right? And then also too, like, his idea of don't erase. And, if you watch anybody, like if you've ever watched any John Contino or Aaron Draplin, how to make a logo kind of videos or anything like that, those guys are experts in like, they're never really throwing anything away. And they're always adapting to it. Cause you never know when you're going to like, oh, that thing 3 versions ago was actually it. Cause we have a tendency to over refine. And that's one thing I've noticed. Coming back to your question about when do you think it's done? Is it done? I don't know if there is work that's ever done these days, just because things are so open-ended and digital and you can always come back to them. But there is a funny thing that I know now that if I'm in like it gets tentative around round 5 for me, especially in like a singular thing like a logo design. Websites can be okay because you've got 25 pages down one end and they're like, go back and rethink the homepage. That can happen. But I have a tendency to see things get overworked. And that comes back to my art world too. At some point, if you keep painting on an oil painting for too long, it becomes this big gray muddy mess. Yeah. And there isn't a clarity to it anymore. And that's one thing I really like about sketching is a lot of times there's a character in something that you sketch that you're just like, why is that right? And so I'm trying to translate it by looking at it into my computer. And then every once in a while I just go, I don't know why. And I'll take a picture of it and put it in my computer. And then I'll find out, the proportions were slightly off or something like that. So there is I think that world of not erasing, not going back and getting rid of the shit that you've been trying, because there can be something really good at that, is one thing. I think that mark making, just starting, is the best. It sounds like, Yogi Berra, the famous coach that said goofy things. I think that's the idea is make a mark. Like if you want to start something, go do it. Go start something. That's what a lot of people say is like, well, how do I get more work doing this kind of work? I'm like,
go do it.
Go do that kind of work, dude.
It gets so much easier after you start it too.
Yeah, totally.
That's the annoying thing.
And I think I do something that you were mentioning a little akin to that, because I truly love what I do. And so a lot of times what I'll do in work situations is I call it parking. Like there's parts of projects I reserve because I really enjoy that part of it. Writing a brand doc or anything like that, that's like being a lawyer, and you're like basically setting up your defense. Like why did you show me that thing with 3 lines and blah blah blah? Well, I'm writing up those rules, but that's the fun part. That's the like, oh my god, I step back at the end of the day and it's resolved, and it has like, it feels like something, right? And you can like build a vibe into it, and that to me is super exciting. And sometimes that stuff, it's really, I guess it's really surprising even how it can accelerate once you've made that choice to start. Like I know I'll come out, I've just been working on a logo project over the weekend, and it started out as like, all right, I'll just go, and I had my logos pretty resolved, but I wanted to put them into situations so the client could see them in context. And that's how I present all my work, because very rarely does a logo happen on a white piece of paper, right?
Sure.
And so I went out and I started doing one, and then the next thing I knew, like once I started to put it in context, I went back and made a couple revisions because I saw the way that it started looking like on somebody's shirt or on a piece of letterhead or as an icon in an iPhone or something. And so that process, it just started to build up all this speed. And next thing I knew, within a couple hours, I had blown out like all 5 directions and got them into their context and refined them all. And so it's also flow state, I think, happens a little bit. And if you get it, time it right, like just starting something can start some amazing stuff. So,
and I know that you're touching on what you just said a little bit about getting it out into different, I guess, forms is the best way to describe it. I know in the past when you've designed like cycling kits, you've had to take a lot of consideration into the design as to the sizing and how it's going to look when it's actually on someone's body, because we're obviously all shaped differently. I found that when I put photos on my phone after I've edited them on the computer, they can look better or worse, and I go back to the computer and make.
Interesting.
Is that sort of what you're doing as far as your design work? Are you taking it from mobile? Are you taking it from, I guess, paper to computer to mobile to?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, is to think about where your work is being digested, and it is super important to check it in all these like viewports, right? Yep. And whether it's a physical thing like clothing. It's a funny thing because, like, you know, a lot of people go, "That's so cool, you design cycling clothes." I'm like, well, do you design websites? It's no different, because like they have expandable parts, right? And like on a bigger monitor, you're gonna have more of your background shown, and on a bigger dude, you're gonna have more of a pattern show potentially. I remember I designed a cycling kit once, and I was behind this guy that we used to make fun that he had hockey butt, and like literally, I was like, did I design that? Did I put those panels on there? Because on a normal human, it was this little accent. But on him, it was like, yeah, it was crazy. I don't know if I always get it right, but I do try and look at it as in many, you know, situations as possible. And I think a lot of that's governed. It's like context at a deeper layer. Like if your brand exists in a certain space, look at it in that space. And that's what you should be designing for. Like, you know, if you designed a brand that you knew was only going to exist on the side of blimps, that's one thing to consider. But if you are designing for your phone and it's an app, that has to have this thing that can be fractured down. So yeah, and actually that's something that's pretty exciting to me too, is now how logos kind of build a consistent signal in terms of a user. Like, I know that symbol, I've seen it on my phone, and now I saw it at a sporting event, and now I saw it, you know, on a shirt go by. I think all those things are really great ways to present it back to your client. Just not only say, hey, look how extensible the logo is, or whatever we're working on for you. And that's what, you know, I think that's an important thing to show your clients, is that you have a want to understand their space, and you are helping them visualize it in their space. Yeah. And I have met a lot of designers that you're just like, you know, they're very like blasé about where it's all going to go. I don't need to learn their industry. I'm just making them a logo. No, you should learn everything about it, because there could be a really easy answer in there about how you're going to solve their problem. And that's, I really do. I look at myself as a catalyst more often than not. I don't think I am any one part or an inventor or anything like that. My job is to talk to a lot of people about all the smart shit they know. And then I'm like, oh, that's a nugget. And I can go and take that and make this thing that you guys will go out and be able to put into practice and let it be successful. The guy I build most of my websites with, we like to joke that, and it's not a joke, we want to help people we want to build communication systems for them that we don't have to be involved in every iteration of it. Because I run an agency. I work on anywhere from 9 to 13 clients probably in a day, right? And so if my clients were always calling me, hey, can you change the copy on this page, blah, 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 I'd rather do the big invention stuff, but give them enough tools that when they go, hey, we could reuse this template that was pretty that was pretty adaptable that they designed, and we can turn it into a list view, or we can put a bunch of headshots in it, and, you know, all of a sudden we've got a new purpose for a page. But they didn't have to slow their business down or wait for us to help them make a decision, because we kind of pre-thought that stuff. And I think being really interested in helping give people tools. I don't want to be there inventing all the minutia most of the time. And so if I can pre-think into that, I'm really proud of that. And when it comes out in the work.
Almost like something that is self-sustaining is maybe a little more work for you in the front end, but something that on the back end goes so much further for both you and the client.
Yeah, totally. And I think that really comes out of being on that client side world, because I got these glimpses of how people were really using tools in great detail, more so than if I went and spent a day in my clients' offices. I mean, I was there and I saw the misery of somebody, or my team would get called in to go down and they're like, well, they don't know how to use this page you designed. And you realize like, oh, they have their job, and if we could just help give them more fluid tools, ask them the right questions. I remember the sales guys came to us and we had redesigned the whole website and we just thought we were awesome. And this sales guy walks into my office and he's like, this new website sucks. And I'm like, what do you mean, man? Look at it. And he goes, tell me how you would call us. And I'm all, so there was no phone number on the top, and it was a really like phone-based software that you called. That was like their whole lead cycle. And so anyway, it was like if we had just gone, and now that's totally part of my process. Is like, and I found this. We were on a trip recently, and I found this patch that says, I always thought the phrase was kind of badass, but as may the bridges I burn light my way. And I thought, like, that's just the most badass statement ever. It was like, damn the torpedoes, like, burn the ships, right? Yeah. Like, fuck off, I'm moving on. Yeah. And I realized I thought about that because we were just talking about that with the students at Studio. The interesting thing is I've really rethought that comment. I think that there's a learning lesson in that if you ever screw up something or you really torch, at least learn from it, because that can pave the way into some other things, like don't do it again. Oh, yeah. And I was like, because maybe it's not as badass as I once thought it was. I mean, it sounds kind of punk rock at first, but then you're like, maybe that's just a learning lesson in there, because that's the one thing is if you do, everyone makes mistakes. And I look at the millions of mistakes I make, whether it's a typo and I go back in and fix it, or all the way out to something like, oh my God, we wrecked this whole project, right? Like there's been those. But I think if you don't learn the things that made those things happen, then you're not doing yourself any service at all. And so I remember buying that patch thing. I'm going to put this on my jacket. It's going to be so cool. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is like a learning lesson, dude. Like it's not that badass. It's actually like prophetic. So anyway,
the more you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Do you have any apps that you use to sort of keep all of this stuff going smoothly? Like I use the Instapaper app pretty often, actually, to track just little snippets I find throughout the day that I want to come back to later. So I'm not just wasting a bunch of time in the middle of the day reading random articles about, lens reviews or something. Yeah. Do you have anything that you're using to sort of just keep everything on track, or is it just literally snapping photos, making notes? And I'm
a pretty voracious note taker. So it's funny because I half of my fear when I went and taught at when I started teaching grad school was it was a very digital forward school. And so much of my processes are pretty analog and pretty paper driven. Technically, really all I ever use, time tracking and stuff like that, all QuickBooks. Yeah. Pretty easy. I've had apprentices that have even worked in the studio and they're like, have you tried this app? You tried this app? And nothing has beat paper for me yet and tracking. So, I was a Basecamp user for a while, but I try and put project management now a lot on my clients. We use Slack at school. That's probably one of the only apps that I'm, using right now. And I really only use it for school. I don't use it for communication with clients or anything like that. I'd rather pick up the phone, like I'm a terrible typer. Like sometimes I start typing and then I'm all, fuck, how do you talk about the subtleties? And a lot of it is context. Like, you read through a series of comments and you're like, okay, should I incorporate these or should I ask them about it? Because a lot of times if you go get clarity on them, which is really hard to do through email or even like an app like Slack. Yeah. I don't know. I've just found like, I haven't done it. It wasn't one of my grad students, but there was a grad student project somebody did a long time ago called Angry Paul Rand. Did you ever see these? And so it was a fake account that if Paul Rand were still alive, what he would be saying to designers today. Yeah. And there was one in particular that I just thought was hilarious. And it was this kid that worked for me. He was like, I think he was searching for a tool to help him solve problems. And I always come back to him and I'm like, hey man, he's like, why aren't you using this? Why aren't you using this? I'm like, well, because this hasn't failed me yet and I can still communicate ideas successfully through these things. And so he was on this constant search. And I remember like around that time reading this tweet and it said something like, in my day, all we needed was a pencil, balls, and a glass of scotch to come up with good ideas. And I was like, that's kind of like where I really do. Like maybe I am Angry Paul Rand because I do think like it comes from within you, really. Like I don't know an app that's going to make me come up with a better idea. Right. It might make me stay more organized, but the reality of it is I can kind of keep track of things in my goofy old way. So I just haven't messed with it. But I've told students too, I'm like, I don't care what apps you use. I'm like, you should get trained in these specific ones because they're probably pretty good for the career path you're heading on.
Yeah, sure.
But if you can sell your idea to somebody in pudding, then do it, And they're always looking at me like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, go use Sketch or use Illustrator or use whatever the latest thing is that you think you need to learn and show it to me. And as long as you can communicate your idea, because that's what you're going to need to do to a client.
Yeah.
They don't care what program you built it in or what app kept you on track getting there.
Yeah.
They just want to see the work. So, yeah. I got curmudgeonly really right there. I got really curmudgeonly.
Pencil, bowls, and Scotch.
I would say bourbon, but
noted.
I guess Rand was a Scotch drinker.
So, aside from teaching, running your own design agency, you are also creator of Caffeinated Mornings.
Yeah.
So, for those who maybe aren't local to Boulder, Denver, tell us what Caffeinated Mornings is. I enjoy it quite a bit.
You've been a guest.
I've been a guest. I've been very fortunate to be asked to be a guest. As a freelance vagabond, it's immensely helpful sometimes when you feel like either you're going crazy or you're living in a world full of crazy people. So where did Caffeinated Mornings come from? Get into that a little bit.
Caffeinated started actually from that. I think I'm a crazy vagabond too, and I was looking... having worked in studios for so long, now working on my own, and literally on my own, I have guys in here every once in a while, students or other designers come to work. But Caffeinated was started because there was a lot of meetups in the Boulder area where you could go in and someone would be teaching you how to do, I don't know, drop shadows or something really very skill driven. Not that my skills are great, but I wasn't worried about getting help on those. I'll go do that on my own when people don't know that I don't know how to use type or something. I wanted to meet other people and find out what made them tick and hear the story behind the music, as it were. The thing that was really cool is it's really been this interesting unification point for at least the creative community in the Front Range. We've had we originally started out only talking to designers, and I'm a designer, and I know we're not the most interesting people all the time. And so I quickly opened it up to be like, well, let's create a community event. So it's a First Friday community event where we showcase someone who makes. And that can be anyone from an entrepreneur to a chef to, we've had photographers like Chip Kalback. We've had filmmakers, artists, true artists, architects. And for me, I'm very rarely inspired by design to go do more design.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by music. I love
the other things.
Yeah, and those all really influence me more. And I think I do that almost as a safety mechanism too. I try not to look at too much design because I'm thankfully in my career I've been a horrible copier. Even when I'm trying to like blatantly copy something, nobody can seemingly tell. It's weird. To me, it's always like really interesting to hear how somebody else in maybe a different discipline gets there because I still think they're getting there, or they're working through stuff, or you're like, man, I'm really impressed by what you do, and you have the same struggles I do every day. So there's a little bit of I'm fine, you're fine in the whole deal.
We're all fine.
We're all fine. We're good.
Okay.
And so it has a couple effects. There's a network effect too, because my good friend has met like the dearest love of his life at a Caffeinated. It's we've had really cool guests. We've had a couple guests who have were literally on the docket coming in that were one thing and had a major life change right before they came to do their talks. We've had people drop crazy things that no one ever knew about them on the stage. So for me, everyone always goes, "Oh, that's so cool you do that for the community." And that was part of it.
Sure.
But it's so selfish too.
Yeah.
I get to sit right there and talk to super rad people.
Why do you think I do this?
Because it's fun, right? It really is cool. And you get this, I don't know. I always look at it as a very firsthand experience of oh, this is so cool. And then all of a sudden you really realize that, there's an audience out there. And man, we've been 4+ years now. Yeah.
And, you've been 4+ years. You've done much better than I have with this podcast. As far as keeping it consistent, it's very hard to do.
It is, it takes work, but I think it's just a different beast because it has a physical place.
Yeah.
And it's this machine that just kind of goes now on its own. And we've got some changes coming up in that, which is going to be cool this year too.
Sweet. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to introduce a field trip series.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Which will be really rad.
Okay.
So
what's cool too that I've noticed is that no matter what it is, like you said, whether it's a chef, photographer, architect, I've never gone and seen the room full of like 3 people. It's always been like a stacked house.
People don't have a lot to do in this town, so let's be straight about that.
It's impressive because it's always, you expect some things. Obviously, some people are going to draw a bigger crowd than others, but it's always consistently people are interested. I imagine there's not, it's not a room full of chefs. It's not a room full of photographers, but obviously people are coming out because they're getting something out of it.
Well, and that's the really interesting byproduct. We have this core audience that I would say is like this fairly stable mass of our people that just come back month to month.
Sure.
But even like, let's say that's 45 to 60 people. Some of those people won't come back, and then all of a sudden we have new ones because they came in and saw us do a chef talk or something like that, and then they're part of our core audience. So it's a really interesting dynamic to, like you said, the room always looks about the same unless it's Mike, and then it's like people outside the walls and stuff. There was people in the rafters on that show, but it's an interesting phenomenon that because those people coming from their own disciplines bring their own network too, because they market it too, right, as it's coming up, and so we're doing our push and they're doing their push, and then that was what was so cool about the Front Range when I moved here. And it still is. I think that's one reason, that's the third reason I did Caffeinated, because when I left the Bay Area, it was isolated. It was starting to feel really isolated. And I think that's a byproduct of competition. Like everyone was really worried who's going to take what from me. A couple of the first meetings I ever had, I was running the agency in the Bay Area, and I was out here, and I sent a couple emails I literally walked up and down Pearl Street, wrote down emails to a couple agencies, had coffee with those guys. They've been guests. Almost all of them have been guests on Caffeinated by now.
Wow.
Gosh, half of those guys I would consider just good friends. And in one of the conversations early on, John Schoenberg, who runs TDA, I said, aren't you worried about those guys? Another agency, they were working on Newton shoes at the time, and I think somebody had New Balance here.
Okay.
And I'm like, aren't you worried about those guys taking it? He goes, nah, there's enough work to go around. And I think that kind of like Zen Buddhist, like there's prosperity for all kind of thing. It permeates a little bit. It gets woo-woo real quick, but there is something that like that connection between all of everyone, like helping everyone out. And so like I've been on some crazy projects where we had, one agency doing back-end development on an app. I was doing branding. We were working with another team, and there was no egos in the way either. That's kind of how it feels here. So Caffeinated has been also one of its like directives, if you will, has been to make sure we don't change that like openness about our creative community here.
No one gets their guard up.
Yeah. And also like being very inviting in and like giving places those people to do, have a cup of coffee with another guy that runs an agency, or if you're new to town, come to this event. And I'm not the only one doing it. Kegs with Legs is a really good one by the Ad Club. Yep. And I've met awesome people at those too. And I think as long as we kind of keep that's one of my goals, is just to keep the creative community social here with one another. Because if I get too busy, I call some of my homies and I'm like, hey, I want to introduce you to my folks. I don't want to take this on right now.
Sure.
And then my clients don't feel let down, and and so it's good. I think it's the right way to keep a community. So as long as I can keep Boulder and Denver and those kind of places where we're all sharing work with each other and everyone knows like that's rad. It's like getting hyped, right? Like skating with friends and you see someone do something cool and you want to do stuff that's cool.
Roam, graze, expel.
Yep. Where did it come from? What's it mean?
Yeah.
That was another one of like, every agency has like process. Yeah. I always thought it was funny. Everyone had these diagrams of like, it's like always a Venn diagram, and it's like, discovery, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, how do I map it back to a cow? And so like we roam, like the first phase of anything. And this is the other thing too, is I have a slide that's really vague when I'm like introducing myself to new clients. And, it is like 3 overlapping circles with roam, graze, expel in it. And there's no time frame on it, because sometimes we go through that whole process in 48 hours. Right. And so that's the other thing. I think a lot of times people, when they hear the word process, they think that time is somehow in there. It's just a point at which you are. Yeah. And so roam for us is like our discovery phase. We're out there, we go out and try and find all the good stuff. Right. And then graze, we digest it and sit on it for a little bit. And then the expel, which, is usually pooping, but it is when we start to turn workout. Yeah. It's because we've digested all this stuff and we're like, okay, here are some things you could do with it. Yeah. So that was just my goofy way of getting people to be like, wait a minute, what does that mean? Do you poop on our work? No. And, but and that was that conversation that I had when I was still in the agency world. I remember the guy going, where will you be on January 2nd? And I'm like, somewhere between here and here, somewhere between start and finish.
Yeah.
But like, what if we hadn't found a really good idea? And it could be, if you told me the work had to be done, we'd be in Expel on January 2nd. Yeah. But like, if all of a sudden we got into like the middle of December and we still hadn't figured out the idea, we might still be in the discovery phase, Rome. Yeah. You know? And so I think one of the things that design tries to be good at is defining too. So like, we've done talks at Even Caffeinated. It's like, what's failure mean, you know, these days? And I think that's something that warrants some discussion and definition. I think the same is true about process because, you know, I had a guy once offer me a bunch of money and he's like, he theoretically offered us money because we were the project manager was running through this ridiculous schedule about how long it took to build a website. And they're just beasts, right? Especially for like a big company. And so he goes, you mean to tell me if I gave you $1 million, you guys couldn't build me a website in a week? And I was like, I bet we could. Would it be the right website? Right. And that's the question. And so like people love these like things where you can go price it all out and show it all on a nice little scale. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have the patience for that stuff. Like somebody promised me a long time ago when I headed into creative that I wouldn't have to look at spreadsheets, and I have to all the time, and it drives me fucking crazy. So, yeah.
So kind of an open-ended, you know, I guess woo-woo question, but how do you define success in what you do, whether that's the mix of teaching and running your own business, or if it's strictly just within your own business? Is there a certain work-life balance that signifies like, all right, this is exactly what I was hoping for? Or is it a certain number of clients? Is it a certain project, a dream client? Everyone has their own answer.
Yeah.
I think it's
also based on life place too.
For sure.
Yeah, so a little bit open-ended, but that's, dude, you know how I answer questions. It's a little all over too. I think I would, if you would ask me this same question 10 years ago, it'd be a different answer. Today, I look at success as, am I happy? That's number one. Is my family happy? I think actually that's number one. Is my family happy? Am I happy? Are we paying bills? And then is the work I'm doing really good? I know that's pretty far down, right? Yeah. But honestly, like I've walked away from work that's been miserable. That probably could have been very recognized, but I'm like, I don't want to be involved in that. It's like, it seems like it's going to be a headache, you know, and people do throw their weight around sometimes. There's some brands that, you know, have a lot of respect and stuff like that. So they almost want you to do stuff for free. And there's a lot of people out there that'll do that work, but I've been really fortunate, knock on wood, with my current client, you know, roster, if you want to call it that. And the workload I have right now, like I'm too busy. You know, and so I'm not complaining, but like if I was a little less busy, would I be a little bit happier? So that right now my meters are going off. Work-life balance, I don't think there is such a thing. I think I'm not, and I remember reading a book about cyclists, and the guy was saying I have to ride every day or I'm not very good. And I think I do. I think I have to design every day because I'm not very good, honestly. Like, and I feel like if I step away from it for a little bit, I start to lose the adequacy I had. Yep. And it was also like a struggle for me to like, okay, I'm going inside now and I won't think about work. And I'd find myself thinking about work. And that was like semi-torturous about that too. My family knows at night that I come back out and work most nights. That's just where I get a lot of my work done. And that keeps our house running. So people are happy about that. I'd be stoked to go to bed a little bit earlier once in a while, but right now it's just the way things are. And so and whether that's a defense mechanism that work life isn't separate. I mean, I live on a ranch, dude. There's days when I've got a jackhammer and, you know, I'm sticking poles in the ground and fixing fences that horses went through, right? And so, like, I'm not really thinking about work then, but I'll drift off every once in a while and go, oh, shit, tonight when I go back to work, I think I'm going to try and get that done. And that's just the way I do it. Like, I have friends that I can go on rides with, and they have really trained themselves to turn it off. I'm just not good at it. And I remember on a ride once, I'm like, hey man, what about that thing when we get back, do you want to work on this? And he's like, are we talking about work? Alan Iverson, you know me, Alan Iverson, that talk about, we talking about practice. You ever seen that interview? No. So anyway, Alan Iverson, I think got into like missed a practice or something, old basketball player. And there's a famous press conference with him where all he did is like, once they started in on this thing, he just go, "We talking about practice?" And then he gave me "We talking about work right now?" And I was like, "Oh shoot, I forgot I can't talk about work with you." Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. So I just went to the back and thought about it on my own. Yeah, so it makes it easier for me. And I think that's the other thing I'm trying to do with my work is it's not that you can't just go through life thinking everything's going to be easy, but I have tried to figure out where is the least resistance and where it matters. Okay, that is worth fighting for. I'm all in on that. I'll totally struggle it out. But there's other times when you're like, that doesn't warrant a shit ton of energy, And so I think that's kind of where, and when I have all those in balance, when there start to be some management and I'm pushing projects through and people are listening, that's kind of success to me. It's when you've built enough trust with your clients that it's not that they're just letting you do what you want to do. And there's so many things that drive what's a successful project. Did it make it on time? Was it under budget? Did we make a lot of money on that? I don't know. I just think a lot of times, really, if my client's happy at the end of the day too, that's another one I really consider. There's some work that I'm like, shit, that's not going in my portfolio. But that really helped that sales team do better phone calls, or we're doing a bunch of collateral redo right now for one of our clients, and they're going to all these events and they're starting to use the stuff, and they're like, "Oh my God, it makes it so much easier to talk to people, and we don't have to carry," because we really rethought that particular project. That was such a designer's project, because they said, "Help us rethink our system before we," rather than just going in and skinning it, which is what a lot of companies would do. They're like, "Hey, we've been doing this thing for 20 years this way. We have a new look and feel. We would like you to apply that to all the things. Why do that?" And these guys were like, "Come in and rethink how we do it." And so we actually got to go interview the people that used the materials for the past 20 years, and they told us the things they liked and didn't like about them. And we reinvented the whole system. But we were hired to do graphic design, but we did a lot more than that. And that to me is a super rad, successful project. It's on my site. But is that where somebody else goes, "I got to work on Nike," and they launched a shoe. I don't know, they're not in the same category, right? They're different, but I'm still just as rewarded because I'm I solved problems. That's my job. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Right on.
Okay, guys, that's it. That's the show for today. Thanks so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you found anything helpful from today's episode, please share it, tell a friend, leave a review on iTunes. All that sort of stuff is going to help me be able to keep this going. If you want to reach out to me on social media, I am just @ChipKalback. So thanks again for listening, and until next time.